a woman's calling is worth more than 5 minutes in the loo.
Welcome to the Eden Podcast, where we true the verse of Genesis 3:16, and we discover that God didn't curse Eve or Adam or limit woman in any way.
I am Bruce Fleming's daughter. You've seen me on some of our Friday episodes. And today we have Joe Saxton with us. Hi, Joe. Welcome.
Hi, good to be with you.
So glad to have you here. Joe is a speaker, podcaster, and author. She's the founder of the Ezer Collective, which is where I met you just in the last year. It's an initiative dedicated to investing in women leaders around the world, equipping them to own their voice, which I love that way of stating it, own their voice, and boldly step into their calling. You currently serve as the executive director of the 25, a leadership development initiative at Bethel University here in Minnesota, in the Twin Cities. And you were born to Nigerian parents and raised in London, so our guests will get to hear your lovely accent. That's always fun. And you love everyday. Okay, so you're married, you have 2 daughters.
Yep.
And here's what it says in your bio. You love everyday stuff like good music, good food, and good friends, which made me laugh because I'm like, as opposed to not good friends. I'm glad we're clarifying.
Yeah, they get around.
Yeah, we don't like the bad friends.
They can go. They can leave. Thank you.
Just the good ones. That's all we need. Well, I'm really excited to get to have this conversation with you since I got to know you by attending the Ezer Collective and seeing your heart for women, your passion for empowering women to be all that they are called by God to be. And I think it'd be fun to start and go back to your how you came to know Jesus story, which I know you have a story from when you were like 9. Can you take us there?
Yeah, sure. My family, like you said, Nigerian family. There are lots of religions in my family. Very religious family, not all necessarily Christian. Do you know what I mean? They do religion of many kinds. And but there was a point when I was about 9 years old where we were instructed to go to the local Methodist church, and which was just down the road from where I lived. So me and my brother went, and it was fine. It was short, which was one of the things I liked about it most. It was short. And then the kids ministry, the leaders of the kids ministry, a really remarkable couple who had encountered God in some quite profound ways. And so although it was the kind of main part of the church was quite rote and staid in some ways, this children's and youth ministry was really alive and really powerful and continually reached out to kids in the local community. And if you went, they had these Bible studies. They were very, I mean, when I think about it now, they were probably quite intense actually, when I think about it, but they were great. But like you had, if you came to their Bible study, the children's Bible study 4 or 5 times, you'd get a free Bible kind of thing and these stickers. And
yes.
By then you wanted one. And I just remember being so drawn by these kids who I knew from school. And I was invited by a kid from school to go to the kids group because I think I might have been in the bullying phase of my childhood, as in being one rather than being bullied. I feel at elementary school, it can flip. Do you know what I mean? It can just, the wind changes and so does the bully. Do you know what I mean? It was kind of that. But I feel like they must have felt the only answer was God. So
for you.
I got invited and I was struck. I was really struck by them talking about Jesus and saying, you know, how you can talk about anything. I remember someone saying to me, you can talk to Jesus about anything, even your teachers, you know, and you're like, oh my gosh, not the teachers. And I remember watching pretty early on this time where the leaders were talking about how you can make a commitment to Jesus and how they'd have an event and all that. And I'd missed it because of when I got there, but they were reflecting on it and the difference it made. And so after a couple of weeks of hearing more about this, I felt like everybody knew this guy that I didn't know. And that I was and this amazing person who I didn't know, and I was being left out on knowing him. And so I said to the children's pastors, I said, what you need to do is have one of those events again, where at the end of the night, you tell us the gospel, as it were. I don't think I called it that at the time, but you tell us who Jesus is and what he's done, and then invite people to become a Christian. I said, if you do that, I will bring a friend and we will become Christians that night. And then,
wow.
And, you know, I've got to be honest, it wasn't until I was an adult that I realized what I'd done.
Keep going.
And so they agreed, they set the date and said, okay, tell me the date. And so I brought a friend and we both became Christians that night. It was just hilarious.
That's amazing. I see what I love about that is I'm like, okay, You could have just been like, yeah, this thing, it seems real. I want it. Will you pray with me? I
Yeah,
want to do that right now. But instead, like you had this idea of how it should be done and you were going to
yeah,
bring someone along with you and you were going to get others to do it that way. Like you were totally leading
yeah.
as a 9-year-old, like
As a- yeah.
9-year-old. Yeah.
Yeah, that
So
was
I
the
love
thing.
that. I love that. I mean, and I think it shows how uniquely wired we all are from the beginning. Like we were born already
Yeah,
hardwired by the Lord with certain gifts and callings and purposes. And, they show up sometimes really young. Other times it takes a while for us to take off the layers of other things and see what's really underneath. But I love that. But that's, you have a heart for raising up other leaders. And I think it's probably because of your calling to be one, and you can't take others where you haven't gone yet yourself.
absolutely.
Yeah. And well, actually, you made a quote about that I really liked. Yeah. Well, you were quoting someone else saying you can't be what you haven't seen.
Oh
Something like
yeah,
that.
Marion Wright Edelman. Yeah, she's I think she's the president emeritus of the Children's Defense Fund, and she said it's hard to be what you can't see.
Yeah.
And it just is such a profound, it's so simple, but
Mm-hmm.
it's so profoundly true. And it's been really true for women in the area of leadership and stepping into their influence and opportunities. I think the second guessing happens because we've not seen it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And
Go
yeah.
ahead.
Well, and I think I've heard the quote in two ways. I've heard it's hard to be what you can't see, and you can't be what you can't see. And I thought, yep, yes to both. Yes
Mm-hmm.
to both. That when you don't see it around you, and you wonder if it's valid.
Yeah.
And who do you think you are? And under what guise does it make it okay? Because you're trying to tell me no one else in history has done it. You know what I mean? It's all of that kind of stuff that goes up, and then you add the area of faith and the kind of the range of theology in terms of women and their place in the church and in the world and the contradictions in that and the voice. There's a lot of voices, and they all get kind of loud and cacophonous. And I think when people are simply trying to be faithful, it's easier to sit down.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I am very thankful growing up as the daughter of Bruce and Joy Fleming. I heard their perspective on women in ministry, women in marriage my whole life. So I grew up with a very egalitarian perspective in terms of the permission for that. But the context I grew up in was pretty conservative and, in denominations where the Bible is the authoritative word of God. And historically, there's a lot of those traditions that have interpreted the scripture to say that, in complementarian views and in ways that aren't as supportive of women in all forms of leadership. And so I didn't see modeling growing up of women as pastors. There were really strong women models in my own family, but like my grandma and her sister, they brought Bible study fellowship to the Twin Cities. They led Bibles. Yep, and they were like the first leaders. Grandma had 500 and Aunt Merle had 600. The second year because they had to split, and it was so many women they were discipling.
Wow.
And beautiful, beautiful examples, but it was still women with women. And I remember going to a Christians for Biblical Equality conference when I was like 10 or 12 with my folks. They were speakers, and it was in Texas. And so we made this fun family road trip out of it. And I just have this memory of me walking down the staircase in the hotel where the conference was. And an older gentleman who was attending the conference, who was a pastor, asked me, "So Christy, do you ever see yourself, being a pastor? Are you interested? Do you have any desire in being a pastor?" And I remember I did not even need to reflect on it. I knew my answer right away. I was like, no, not interested. And it was the only time somebody ever like flat out asked me that. And, good on him for that.
Yeah.
But I realize now as a 42-year-old woman, I just didn't have modeling of it. And all I had seen were men being pastors the way a man would pastor, which is great. But I didn't see myself implicated in that. I knew there was nothing that made me go, I want to do that. But now at the age I'm at now, I'm still coming into my own, but I realize I have a pastoral heart. I have like pastoral giftings and strengths. And I'm in a season of life with young twin girls just starting school where I'm like, I just went through a season of evaluating, am I called to ordination? My pastor asked me to consider that. Discerned it took us, 6-month process to really discern that. And I feel like the Lord has said, no, that's not where I'm calling you right now. But I think how many of us women have never considered entire possibilities because we just haven't seen it modeled.
Yeah. And I think when you haven't seen it modeled, you also don't like, there are two things. It's whether it's seen as valid and also how you're going to make it work. The practicalities of how you're going to make it work.
Yeah.
Particularly if there is a relative you're taking care of, whether that's an aunt, a sibling or a parent or a child. You know, if you are a caregiver in any form, if you are, how do you make it work? If you're thinking of your life changes, you know, if you're thinking of, what if I get married? How does this change this? What if I have kids? How does this, you're thinking, what if I have another kid? You're thinking all ahead. And if there is no, if you don't see people at any of those junctures and milestones, then you either feel it's valid, but it's valid for other people. It's valid. Those become the options, because there's no living illustration of the how. And I think that has been a boulder, that if it was already a little bit shaky, if you're already a little bit uncertain, then you can be sure that boulder falls on the call, and you're done.
Yeah, that is such a good insight there. I remember in my teen years and then in my early 20s thinking, yeah, I mean, I'd like to be married, but I don't know if I should, because I think I viewed it as like that would hold me back. I didn't have language for it, but I had this sense that I was a leader and I wanted to do big things. And if I got married, I might get stuck at home with kids and not get to do the real things I wanted to do. And, you know, that, not that staying home with I chose to stay home with children once I had my own. And that was a very intentional choice. But I think without the modeling of it in the world, in my world, at least, I didn't know how to be as big as God has made me to be, and how to fill that space fully without backing down in some way, or like thinking I had to make compromises and I couldn't be all of the things.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense. I think that's a very common conversation. Well, you and I both got married a little later in life. You got married at 29. Yeah. I was 34. And now we both have 2 daughters. So that's kind of something fun we have in connection there. Tell me a little bit about that part of your journey, and how, like, tell me, how has that been a part of enabling you to be, like, has that worked, you know, hand in glove with being a leader, pursuing mentoring leaders, being married? Has it been a detractor? How has being a wife and a mother played into that? I mean, it's interesting, because I think when Chris and I met, I was already pretty established in the UK as a speaker and leader. And so on one level, it didn't feel it was going to change anything. But I think there were a number of areas. One, how he was perceived was an interesting one, in terms of the expectations. It's almost like people were like, well, to justify what you're doing, he needs to be this, that, and the other.
Oh, yeah.
Sure. And I thought, well, that's new. So that was one pressure point. And it almost didn't matter what he and I felt. It was because you didn't have control over the jobs you were getting and things like that. And so it was almost the world around you where I was like, even people who had, how can I put it? I'll put it this way. It was at that moment I worked out how egalitarian an environment I was or wasn't in.
Tell me more about that.
When I was as a single woman, I didn't disrupt any. I disrupted the well as a single woman. Sure. But I wasn't saying anything about marriage. But when it came to getting married, there was, it's like, you know, well, I remember there was one moment where my pastor had wanted me to step down from some things because he felt like I was too strong or too secure, or Chris wasn't secure. And I thought, you would have never asked that if it was the other way around. Oof. You'd have never, it wouldn't have even been a deal. Yeah. But so it revealed that, and this kind of notion of whether he had to catch up to the things I was doing. And it's like, and I remember just looking and thinking, this is new language. This is new. I was the last of my peers, male and female, to get married. And so I'm like, I never heard this said about any of the guys' wives ever. And so that was the first place I began to notice it. And then I think when we moved here, when I was 30, and again, I just found myself in rooms where people would say, "Where's your husband?" And they'd be like, "Oh, is your husband here?" I'm like, "No," because there's no reason for him to be at this meeting. And I think I found myself stumbling into worlds which were just incredibly uncomfortable with my presence.
Was that more in Christian worlds or non-Christian worlds?
Yeah. Completely Christian worlds. Christian. And then you just see the degree of conservatism people have about you and talking to you, or like why you're in the room in some way. I think that became apparent. And again, what felt really lonely was the sense of not having people to work it out with in terms of what does it look like to be married in this moment? Do I need to make myself smaller? Do I need to shift who I am in some way? What does it look like to have children? And I actually thought when I had the kids, I would stop doing all the speaking stuff. I genuinely did. One, because I loved it, but I thought, well, it's a new season. And so I found myself I'd get invited to something and I thought, I can't write this off, but I never expected this. And so there was a lot of internal kind of wrestling and trying to understand, am I a bad parent because I'm doing this? Am I a good parent because I'm doing this? And a couple of things really helped. There's one time when I was in the UK and Chris was with, I think I was pregnant. I was pregnant with my youngest, and Chris was with my then toddler. And I remember him saying something like, I was just describing what happened. And he said, this is like having my wife back. This is like having her back. So let's not do whatever that other thing was again.
Oh, wow.
And he said, you sound more you sound more, you sound alive, you sound excited about the things and just, I wasn't even talking about anything I'd done, just describing the event. And I think that was a moment for me and just gave me perspective really on that. So I think that was a key marker. And when my kids were maybe, I think a kindergartner and a preschooler, we were living in California at that point. And one of my friends, one of the mums at the gate, she'd said to me, she said, if you guys need any help and everything, and just let me know. And I remember feeling I was really moved because I was moved because I felt guilty. I felt guilty that I was traveling and I had this demanding job. And at that point, my husband was a pastor for a short while. And like, should I just be doing things where he is and all that kind of stuff? And so I remember thanking her, and she could see that I felt really conflicted. And she said, no, she goes, you misunderstand. She goes, you misunderstand. She goes, I'm not called to what you do. You're called to this. I'm called to this. And so she said, I'm not helping you out as such. I'm fulfilling my call as you're fulfilling your call.
Wow.
Yes. So she said, so you go and do what you're called to do, and I will, and let me do, basically she was like, let me do my calling in supporting you. And it was very much this collective thing, like, how did we do kind of thing when I would come back from a place, because as far as she was concerned, this was how our calling unfolded. And I think those two moments just went a long way in helping me understand what it was to lead as a wife and a mum. And what it looked like when my kids were babies was different as preschoolers, different in elementary, different in middle and high school. It's changed.
Yeah.
But it gave me grace and understanding. It gave me insight to what it could look like.
I love that. And it's got me thinking of like 3 different places we could take the conversation, right? I want to talk about the Ezer Collective and what was behind that. I also, I think let's go to this one next though, because we're still kind of on this. A couple years ago, I started, back in like 2019. Time flies. That's not a couple of years ago anymore. Yeah. I started the Mom Podcast because I was a new mom and I was 36 at that point, taking care of twin babies, like in over my head. And I had this moment with God where I realized he was inviting me to be gentle and give myself grace because I was so overwhelmed all the time. And I had this thought, I realized I have had more education and training for every other job I've ever had in my life than this one of being a mom to twin babies. Like nobody, never read a manual. I have no idea how to do twin babies. And I just got passionate about like, okay, what's going on in the world that like, I felt like I knew I wasn't the only mom who was dealing with like mom shame, trying to do it all also, and not knowing like, how do I juggle it? And so we tackled topics like we wanted to have a space where like the vision I had in creating this podcast was, okay, we need a place to ask honest questions where we know we're not alone in the struggle. We feel seen and loved in the midst of the mess. And there's space here for curated conversations around topics of, that like not enough women are talking about. So we started, we would do episodes on things like I made up the word enoughness, like, talking about our sense of identity and where we get our sense of enoughness, making mistakes, coming to God like a papa or a grandpa whose lap is always open and we don't have to wonder, are we welcome today or not? Permission to rest, how to handle constant change, grief, mom shame, being emotionally safe parents, what it means to be in the image of God as female, like, conversations that just need to be happening, but in a context where it wasn't about like, we're here to say all moms need to stay home with their children, or all moms need to homeschool, or all moms need to go back to work, or, but just what does it look like to be given permission to be you in every season, including the mom stages. And so if we had you as a guest on the mom podcast, I would have asked you, to tell us, how did you find permission? How did you get to a place of, and you were kind of saying that, like, your husband, he saw that you were more you when you were doing what you were wired to do. You found another friend whose calling was to help with watching your children. But I see that as being like the body of Christ, each playing their part.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was raised, being raised by Nigerian, like in a Nigerian context, although it was in London, it's a collective culture. So extended family is real. And there were always aunties, which was great when it was your birthday, but terrible when you got in trouble for something because you'd have to talk to every single auntie, and it was an absolute nightmare. But I was used to the whole collective vibe, and how meaningful that could be. And I think that was an integral part of my understanding that that's how families existed. And so therefore there would be people who you weren't outsourcing, but it was more that the nuclear family was never the original design.
Yes.
And that even if one of us was staying at home, it still wouldn't be enough.
Yeah.
Actually, still wouldn't be enough to do all the things that need to be done in a family. So I think that helped me a lot to understand that. And I think that gave me a little bit of an advantage, because my understanding of family was always a little bit more expansive. What I could do on my own. There was always a need for somebody else in the mix.
I love that.
Yeah.
And I think that that's one of the things missing in Western civilization is we have the sense of like the nucleus family is it, and you have to figure out how to make it work by yourselves. So you use the word collective, and I would imagine that influenced you when you began the Ezer Collective.
Yeah.
True 316 Foundation is the home of the Eden podcast. Join us for $3.16 a month or more. Let's true the verses on the key passages on women and men. Go to true316.com/partner. True 316 is strengthening and encouraging many, and we're getting stories every day of lives changed through our ministry. We're the home of the Eden podcast, and we're getting the word out that God didn't curse Eve or Adam or limit woman in any way. Our volunteer help is wonderful, and we grow stronger with each new true partner who gives to the True 316 Foundation so that we can cover the costs to do the technical work of the Eden podcast, to coordinate our True School workshops like the 2-week Eden workshop on Genesis 2 and 3, and to make the True 316 Foundation function in its outreach to scholars and students around the world. You can give now with a one-time gift. And better still, you can join now and become a monthly donor. We call our monthly donors our true partners. Please join now by going to true316.com/partner.